At the Summer Game Fest of 2023, Sonic Superstars was announced, a game that returns to Sonic's roots, yet again, for a classic Sonic adventure. Once again, in the 2.5D perspective, the classic side-scrolling Sonic gameplay looks to be back with an all-new 3-dimensional art style, a roster of 4 playable characters, the return of an obscure Sonic villain from the 8-bit era, new abilities, and new stages. Sonic has been in a good spot recently, with Sonic Frontiers delivering a thoroughly enjoyable open-zone adventure with huge upgrades in terms of the amount of content included in a 3D Sonic game. The 2 Sonic movies released to theaters were heavy hitters at the box office, and both were critical successes. And if the IDW comic series wasn't doing this already, the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog demonstrated that we've entered an era where an emphasis on story and a large cast of characters are absolutely welcome additions to this franchise. It's an exciting time to be a Sonic fan across the board. We're seeing Sonic projects that have really upped the standard, no longer shying away from ideas that weren't so successful initially and refining them. Sonic Superstars seems to be another example of this, as it feels like the culmination of what Sega, Sonic Team, and Dimps needed to learn as Sega seek to elevate the 2D Sonic to the same level of importance as his 3D modern counterpart. So in this here video, we're going to be looking back at the history of Sega's classic Sonic revival to properly evaluate why Sonic Superstars is so significant.
悪しくジドフルフールシクワイムワルブガディワムワムシバグーフーケアポムクープバーメン
Now, if you are a Sonic fan, you'll probably have the understanding that the 2D Sonic never really left. For starters, from 2008 onwards, 2D side-scrolling gameplay was being re-implemented as a core part of Sonic's gameplay in games like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Colors. Development team Dimps would also be contracted to work on 2D Sonic titles for handheld systems between the years of 2001 and 2010. So 2D Sonic games were always around, whether it was in the form of countless compilation boxed sets or the Sonic Advance and Sonic Rush series. But it was in 2010 that Sega really wanted to bring 2D Sonic games back onto consoles as event status titles in the spotlight. And what better place to start than to create a Sonic the Hedgehog 4. Bizarrely though, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 would release in an episodic format. Nostalgic, right? You remember Episodic games for the Sega Mega Drive? So looking at Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, this was far from what anyone really wanted. The only desire this game fulfilled was just, it's a 2D side-scroller game. That's all they got right about this. Sonic's controls felt like a dismal misinterpretation of the classic games, lacking in the logic and reliability of that classic Sonic physics gameplay. In the classic games, rolling into a ball was a way of transferring the momentum you'd earned in previous games into raw power. Yet here, rolling momentum is just non-existent. Sonic uncurves so quickly, you don't really get to do anything with the momentum that you've earned, meaning that the spin dash has to pick up all of the slack in order for the player to experience any kind of actual power as Sonic. Sonic 4 also did not feature any original stage ideas, but instead facsimiles of existing stages from Sonic 1 and 2. Not only that, boss fights were entirely reused from Sonic 1 and 2, albeit with new pinch modes. Sonic 4 would not use any of the power-ups or new features from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, so this was a regression. It regressed the different ways you could vary up the Sonic playstyle. There are no elemental shields. You can't juggle the goalpost to get more goodies. You didn't even have act-to-act transitions. Sonic was also the only playable character, which was a massive overcorrection to complaints at the time that the Sonic cast was getting too large. But weirdly enough, for a game so obsessed with nostalgia, Sonic 4 would not even restore the art style synonymous with the classic Sonic games, favoring the lankier, more detailed design established through the 2000s. And then they pair that up with the most clownish attempt at recreating that sort of Sega Genesis sound chip. This game just felt so very at odds with itself. Now, Sonic 4, it's the sequel you've waited however many years for. A sequel's purpose is to take what works about the foundations laid by what came before and build on top of that. The only thing Sonic 4 Episode 1 actually builds on top of existing foundations is the homing attack. This is the only new addition, and it only serves to reduce the interactivity of the game, as now the player does not need to aim themselves at springs or enemies. It can be done automatically, all with the touch of a button, reducing platforming precision by quite a bit. If Sonic 4 Episode 1 was a response to fan requests, it made the fans look like a bunch of idiots. To say it was a massive overcorrection would be an understatement. It's an overcorrection to the point of being absolutely reductive. As a game on its own 2 feet, it's underwhelming, and as a sequel to the original trilogy, it's frankly disheartening to see how little regard Sega has for their most beloved series on their most beloved console back at a time when they're on the top of their game to the extent of making Mario quiver, that they were willing to just slap that label on what was originally intended to be a basic mobile phone game to introduce a new audience to the series. And that's the truth. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 was originally intended to be titled Sonic the Portable, which is also a really dumb title, as what in-universe is Sonic portable? I mean, given that he has legs, yeah, I'd hope he would be. Evidence of this exists in the blurry-ass Ferris wheel signs in Casino Street, and okay, strictly as a mobile game, Sonic 4 Episode 1 is entertaining enough to keep you occupied on a 2-hour train journey. It works, but this attitude towards the revival of the classic series just seemed callous. Dimps were not the only development team taking a stab at re-establishing the classic series, though. As for Sonic's 20th anniversary in 2011, Sonic Team cooked us up Sonic Generations, a game that would bring 2 unique playstyles to the table, and with it define the distinction between the classic and modern Sonic, beyond just a change of art style. With the Sonic we've grown to know over the course of the 2000s being defined as modern Sonic, complete with the boost gameplay style established in Sonic Unleashed, and then we've got the more rounded, rubber-hosey Sonic of the 1990s being defined as classic Sonic, with a gameplay style made to emulate the style of the original Sonic games on the Sega Mega Drive. These 2 Sonics would run through the franchise's 20-year history in a small selection of fan-favorite stages from each of the most significant titles in the franchise's history. Sonic Generations is one of the most beloved Sonic games, and it isn't hard to see why. It's consistently enjoyable, it has strong art direction, some of the best level design in the franchise, especially for the modern Sonic, and it feels like a worthy celebration of the Hedgehog's 20-year odyssey at that point. But with all that being said, the real star of the show was the modern Sonic, as his gameplay has been refined from Unleashed and Sonic Colors to be more compatible with the kind of precise platforming that the best Sonic games would boast. This imitation of classic Sonic, on the other hand, sadly couldn't quite keep up with his modern counterpart now at the top of his game. See, while classic Sonic in Generations certainly wasn't a bad attempt at recreating the classic playstyle, this definitely wasn't the most refined version of it. Once again, that special sauce just wasn't quite there. Classic Sonic has always been about momentum, building it, sustaining it, and dominating the stage with it. What we had here was a classic Sonic that felt very reliant on the spin dash in order to get that kind of power trip that comes with the classic Sonic gameplay style. Sadly, the rolling issue with Sonic 4 Episode 1 persists here. If you've earned momentum through running, curling into a ball is just going to kill that. So the spin dash has to pick up the slack, and admittedly, it really does, as the spin dash is far more powerful than what it was in the past, sending Sonic into a bullet-like state that admittedly makes him incredibly difficult to control. As well as this, jumping was just a little bit too heavy, making precision platforming a little less reliable than it was in the classic series. Certain power-ups from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, such as elemental shields, would return, but exclusively in challenge stages centered around those specific mechanics, or as toggle options in a power-ups menu. Other features, like juggling the goalpost sign for goodies, were now absent. For what it was as a secondary gameplay style, Sonic Generations' rendition of the classic Sonic was perfectly satisfactory, working effectively as a tribute to Sonic's early years, and harmoniously enough with the level design that accommodates well enough for areas where this version of the classic Sonic does fall short. This wasn't the last time we'd see classic Sonic in 2011 though, as in lead up to Sonic 4 Episode 2, Sega would re-release Sonic CD for the current, at that time, consoles and mobile phones. However, this wasn't just a simple port job, with the entire game being decompiled and rebuilt in a new engine referred to as Retro Engine. This would allow any technical problems to be easily addressed and for the game to run natively in widescreen at 60 FPS, along with other quality of life improvements. To achieve this, Sega recruited Retro Engine developer Christian Whitehead to reconstruct Sonic CD for a new generation. But dumbfoundingly, this would also tie in directly with the story events of Sonic 4 Episode 2, this time made with the fullest intent of being an actual follow-up to the classic series, as opposed to a mobile game with the Sonic 4 title just slapped onto it. With it, certainly came some improvements. The physics saw quite an overhaul. Even if they didn't successfully replicate the sharp, speedy movement of the classics, they at least made a semblance of sense this time with a jump that could carry forward momentum and improved rolling. The boss fights were new and original. The aesthetic didn't mirror the classics, not that it would make any sense if it did now because of Episode 1, but there were major graphical improvements as stage geometry was now fully rendered in 2.5D as opposed to illustrations. We now had 2.5 playable characters in this one, and the sound chip that the music was made with at least feels somewhat more authentic to classic Sonic music while still quite a way off. But for all those steps forward, Sonic 4 Episode 2 still didn't quite manage to redeem this return to the classic Sonic series. Tails was now part of the adventure, but unlike previous games, he was integral to the core gameplay, as platforming would regularly require the player to call Tails to lift them over certain areas and link up with Sonic to 69 their way through breakable walls. There were no alternate paths that could be taken purely by Sonic alone, and Tails was not playable as a separate character unless in co-op. Relying on Tails would kill all momentum and destroy any kind of flow state that Sonic had achieved, but worse yet, absolutely decimated the Supersonic experience, as Sonic would exit his super form whenever Tails was called for mandatory platforming sections. Metal Sonic was only playable in a small selection of slightly altered Sonic 4 Episode 1 stages, provided the player owned both episodes on the same device. Gameplay features from Sonic 3 and Knuckles were still absent or just outright ignored. The stages still lacked originality, as rather than ripping off stage themes from the classics wholesale, we'd instead get fusions of different level themes that we'd seen before. Sylvania Castle was really just a mashup of Aquatic Ruin and Marble Garden, White Park was really just a mashup between Ice Cap and Carnival Night, Oil Desert was a mashup between Oil Ocean and Sandopolis, and Sky Fortress was literally just a repaint of Wing Fortress. Ironically enough, the most original stage in the game was the Death Egg stage, which only lasted for a singular act, and the final boss, which again was at least original. Speaking of the bosses though, they had so much fanfare and grandiose that the player would stand waiting around for 30 seconds at a time as the boss introduces itself. Junsono's soundtrack for this game was also incredibly repetitive, with really short loops. Sonic 4 Episode 2 was an okay follow-up, leaps and bounds better than Episode 1, but still incredibly underwhelming as a game on its own, and once again, pretty embarrassing as a sequel to the classic series. After this though, Christian Whitehead would be brought back on to work on more mobile recompilations, this time for Sonic 1 and 2. So naturally, it only made sense that he and a team of other Sonic enthusiasts, including Stealth, Headcanon, Tyson Hess, and T. Lopes, would be brought in to make the next 2D Sonic game for Sonic's 25th anniversary, serving as the true successor to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, with Sonic 4 being effectively scrubbed of its place in the Sonic timeline. Sonic Mania would see the return of the classic Sonic, in a completely 2D side-scrolling adventure, complete with a 32-bit pixel art style, a pitch-perfect recreation of the classic Sonic gameplay, paired with a Sonic CD-inspired soundtrack by T. Lopes, all made in the Retro Engine. The game would be bookended by 2 animations by Tyson Hess inspired by Sonic CD's cutscenes. Tails and Knuckles were also playable in the base game, as players would be treated to a selection of 12 unique zones, consisting of 8 remixed zones from the original Sonic series, and 4 brand new stages designed by the new team. For the remixed stages, the first acts would be virtually identical to their original counterparts as far as level design goes, while the second acts would take on bold new directions with new features. Mighty and Ray could also be purchased as additional playable characters along with an encore mode, which would add some new gimmicks and color palettes to the stages. Sonic Mania is an excellent game. It celebrates the history of Sonic in an incredibly multifaceted and nuanced way. It understands and builds upon what came before with gorgeous 32-bit style art, improved animation, music remixes that feel like how the original was always intended to sound, features and gimmicks which complement the theming, and not only that, as perfectly as the team had recreated the classic Sonic playstyle, Sonic came with a new move called the Drop Dash, which added a whole new layer to the platforming experience while not sacrificing the efficaciousness of any other moves such as rolling. But the absolute best aspect of Sonic Mania was easily the 4 original levels created by the new team. These stages were refreshing glimpses of what a new classic Sonic game could truly achieve. When I think of classic Sonic stages, the first thing that springs to mind for me is not really Green Hill Zone anymore, but Studiopolis. This stage is so quintessentially Sonic to every last detail, with its combination of neon and Art Deco art styles, complementary colors, unique lighting effects, slopes, and pinball features. This was the first original stage in the game, and it stands out as one of the best in the series, but the other new zones easily live up to it too. These new zones are so good that it begs the question, why even include remixed stages? Why not just instead have a classic Sonic title with all new stages? Heck, why is the ratio of returning stages to new stages so skewed in favor of the returning ones? Sonic Mania was a great game, a great anniversary game, a great celebration of Sonic's history, but I really was more excited by the prospect of a follow-up that didn't rely on those classic stages, but would instead blaze its own trail from start to finish, with Sonic Mania offering up a tremendous celebration of 25 years to the classic Sonic. Modern Sonic would run parallel with his own game, one he'd share with his classic self for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Giving classic Sonic his own game and modern Sonic his own game for the 25th anniversary seemed like a no-brainer, but no, modern Sonic would be sharing his slice of the birthday cake by doing the Generations thing again, sort of. Unlike Generations though, classic Sonic is relegated much more to a side character status, as he has a far smaller number of stages than his modern counterpart. Also in the mix was an avatar character that would be designed by the player, so classic Sonic really got around a quarter of this adventure as opposed to the half that he'd get in Sonic Generations. So, after the new team assembled for Sonic Mania absolutely knocked it out of the park in bringing classic Sonic back, we now had a point of comparison for Sonic Team's rendition of classic Sonic, as our 2 Sonics and the Avatar would speed their way through a selection of zones. 3 of which were brought back from the classics, and 4 of which were original stages, with classic Sonic never actually visiting the Metropolis. Now, at this point, the whole bringing back existing stages thing is really starting to get tired. 2 of the returning stages here are Green Hill and Chemical Plant, which were done to death at this point, appearing in both Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania. As for how this game approached classic Sonic gameplay, well, there are a few improvements to how he handled in Sonic Generations. His spin dash was no longer as overpowered as it was in Generations. He'd no longer automatically bounce off of springs, now having to actually jump on them, and he could actually stay in a rolling state for longer than just a few seconds, rendering it no longer completely useless. So it sounds like they fixed the issues, but that would be just too easy. When it comes to Sonic Forces, everything had to be downgraded for some reason, so now classic Sonic carries a disproportionate amount of momentum in his jumps, making them twitchy, unpredictable, and making precise platforming an absolute disaster. There's no longer a gradual build-up to top speed, as Sonic accelerates into his top speed very suddenly. This also applied to the modern Sonic. Momentum is no longer dictated by the stage geometry, but instead scripted events, so Sonic will lose and gain momentum seemingly for no reason at all. Accompanying the classic Sonic was an attempt at recreating 16-bit chiptune music, which, okay, it's better than what they did with Sonic 4, but it doesn't really work. but also it feels like such a downgrade from the 64-bit inspired new Jack Swing style soundtrack of Sonic Mania and the more pop-style classic Sonic music from Sonic Generations. This wasn't just a matter of classic Sonic repeating the same old tricks, revisiting the same old levels, trying to evoke the same old feelings. This was actually a bad recreation of him, to the point where even Sonic 4 Episode 1 felt better, because at least he was somewhat predictable. Then, in 2022, we get another classic games compilation. This time with the Christian Whitehead recreations of Sonic 1, 2, and CD compiled into one game, and now with a new Sonic 3 recreation led by Stealth. But in the process of porting these mobile games over to consoles, while also adding a few new features like the drop dash and some challenge modes, a lot of the features of these games ended up getting broken, creating new bugs and glitches. There were some silver linings to this. We did get some really nice new animated cutscenes by Tyson Hesse, with music by T-Lopes, but on a whole, this collection just wasn't the celebration of classic Sonic it should have been. But even then, are we not noticing a bit of a trend here with classic Sonic? While Sonic 4 used the modern art style, it was still intended as a revisitation to the classic series, and all Sonic 4 had to offer was some facsimile stages and an inferior physics engine. With Sonic Generations, they rolled out classic Sonic, but with an inferior recreation of the classic playstyle to run along through levels we've already played before. With Sonic Mania, the best aspect of the game was when they weren't celebrating old levels and instead bringing us brand new ones, but sadly that takes up less than half of the game. Sonic Forces classic Sonic was not only guilty of spending too much time in familiar locations, but they completely destroyed the classic Sonic playstyle. And Sonic Origins? Well, it's just another compilation. Classic Sonic just gets wheeled out whenever Sega thinks it's time to celebrate the past. At this point, classic Sonic is just a product of the past. He's a party trick for Sega to roll out whenever they want a round of applause, whenever it's Sonic's birthday, so we can go, hey, I remember that. And that's not only a disservice to modern Sonic with the implication that he's not even worth celebrating, but it's a disservice to classic Sonic to just treat him as the old grandpa who shows up to your birthday and tells stories of his youth, which is remembering worse and worse each time. Classic Sonic is fading, which is also literally true, as I swear this guy becomes a paler shade of blue each time we see him. To think, starting with 2010, we got a new decade of classic Sonic alongside modern Sonic. To think that in the 10 years Sega have tried to bring him back into relevance, we've done nothing but go back to old levels and remember the youth, remember the Mega Drive, remember the Saturn. The idea of having classic Sonic games running parallel to modern Sonic games is smart. Like with Mario, you've got games like Odyssey, which are the big game-changing titles, and then you've got the new Super Mario Bros. Series, which is made to kind of complement that, but offer a simple, reliable experience. The problem here is currently I just don't think classic Sonic is getting enough to do to justify a parallel series. Yet. That may be about to change. Hope is on the horizon. Which brings us to here, 2023. With a brand new Sonic game on the way this fall, Sonic Superstars, and I, for one, could not be happier with what I'm seeing. Now, I think it would be both an easy move and a smart move, and just a goddamn good move to bring Christian Whitehead and the Mania team back on board to just make another Sonic Mania, this time with entirely original levels. That's like all I really want from classic Sonic. I feel like that's enough to justify it going forward. Now, Sega had been planning on doing something along those lines, another collaboration with Christian Whitehead, but for whatever reason, plans fell through. And so, series creative officer Takeshi Iizuka approached Sonic's original co-creator Naoto Ohshima and his team at RZ Studios to develop the new classic Sonic game. It's worth noting that Ohshima has not worked on Sonic since Sonic Adventure 1 all the way back in the late 90s, so yes, this is a very significant collaboration in Sonic history. There will be some members of the Mania team returning to work on this project, with Tyson Hesse and Powerhouse Animation returning for the opening animation, and T-Lopes assisting with the soundtrack, while Shun Sonoi is ultimately the lead composer for the game. Rather than sticking with the 32-bit style pixel art, Sonic Superstars instead goes for 3D model stages and characters akin to Sonic 4 Episode 2, with classic Sonic, Tails, and Dr. Robotnik all seeming to draw inspiration from their generation's designs, albeit with a few little tweaks here and there, while Amy and Knuckles get brand new models to reflect their classic designs. According to Takeshi Iizuka, a part of the reason for the visuals being three-dimensional this time was so that Sonic could also interact with background and foreground elements. I guess I'd compare that to the Klonoa series, with how the games are not just 2.5D in terms of visuals, but also mechanics. The game features 4 playable characters, with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and now Amy all playable in both single and multiplayer modes. This game is being made to appeal as both a single-player platformer, but also as a family and party game. While co-op is still strictly local, there will be online battle modes. I have no idea what that entails, probably just racing I'd imagine, which still sounds good. It's about time Sonic finally got a bit of multiplayer action online. The story will be keeping things simple, like the classic series, with Sonic and his friends, now dubbed the Superstars, headed to North Star Island, where Dr. Robotnik has assembled a new team consisting of Fang the Weasel and new character Trip, a clumsy dinosaur robot from the looks of things. Now, given that this takes place on an entirely new island, the game will be made up entirely of all new zones. But I mean, okay, they could for all we know just drop a cyberspace on us at the last minute again, and then suddenly we've got all the same green hills and chemical plants we've seen far too much of already. But no, Takeshi Iizuka has stated that Sonic Superstars will consist of exclusively brand new zones on the North Star Islands. Now, from what we can gather in gameplay footage, Sonic's controls look near identical to how they were in the classic series and Mania. Takeshi Iizuka claims the team have worked tirelessly to replicate the classic Sonic gameplay style this time, with players at the Summer Game Fest, including Fidel from GamesCage, saying that the game feels really good and that the game devs have really gotten classic Sonic right this time. We're seeing a lot of returning features from Sonic 3 and Knuckles as well, with minor bosses in the first act and bonus stages in the checkpoint poles reminiscent to the Sonic 1 special stages, while the actual special stages can be found inside giant hidden rings in each act. The special stages consisting of 3D web swinging? Man, that cross-section between Spider-Man and Sonic fans, it grows ever larger every day, I swear. But this time, you don't need all 7 emeralds to reap the benefits from these miracle gems. Now, there's no saying whether or not elemental shields will be making return for Sonic Superstars, but there are certainly elemental power-ups this time that come from the Chaos Emeralds themselves, as Sonic can use these to climb waterfalls, summon armies of decoys, and just do a whole bunch of other stuff that we haven't yet seen. These operate on a time basis with a cooldown, so they can't just be exploited or spammed. It looks like you may be able to juggle the goalpost, possibly for some extra power-ups or points. It's hard to say. It does bounce as you run past it, so maybe? I kinda hope so. I guess it's probably just a little unlikely that we'll see elemental shields given how we have the emerald elemental power-ups now. So without elemental shields, it's probably harder to justify signpost juggling, as all you could get out of it is like a 1-up or some rings or something. So this game is set to retail at $60 for the base version. Presumably, there'll be a digital deluxe edition, as Sega have been particularly aggressive with that business model as of late. There has been some backlash towards the price tag for a side-scroller, but I'll say this, for me it's dependent on the content. If this is the usual 12-zone, approximately 2-hour duration, yeah, $60 is a bit steep. Now, I guess that can be filled out a little if there are lots of multiple paths, possibly brought in by elemental powers and the other playable characters, but at that price tag, I'm kinda just banking on this being the biggest Sonic side-scroller yet. It's hard to gauge that for sure, but I am excited by what I'm seeing here, and I don't think that fundamentally a side-scroller is worth any less than a 3D title. This looks to be the ideal title to complement Sonic Frontiers, and I'm hoping that Sega will follow this business model going forward, with 3D open zone games running parallel to classic Sonic adventures with little space between the two. Safe to say, us Sonic fans are eating good in 2023. A quick note on the music. In gameplay videos, we have heard music, but it is just placeholder stuff that's being reused from Sonic 4 Episode 2. Players have confirmed that no, that is not the music that plays in the game. I am a little apprehensive with Jun Senoi taking the lead here, though. I love the work he's done on modern Sonic games. He's easily one of my favorite Sonic composers, but when it comes to classic-style music, if Sonic 4 and Origins are anything to go by, he's just not a great choice for classic Sonic stuff anymore, especially when limiting himself to a retro sound. That said, having T. Lopes and other composers in the mix sounds promising, so I'm hoping for less of a retro sound but more the pop, new jack swing style that classic Sonic is synonymous with. T. Lopes and Jun Senoi's collaborations so far for the Sonic YouTube channel and for Team Sonic Racing have been fantastic, so if it works out, we're in for a banger soundtrack. So personally, I think a Mania follow-up with the same team and all original stages would have been an absolutely great way to go, but I am happy with what I'm seeing here. I'm glad that they are branching off of the pixel art and giving the 2.5D art style another try, as it did actually work pretty well in Sonic 4 Episode 2. And it looks even better here when paired up with the classic Sonic models. The Emerald power-ups do appear to be very Wisp-inspired, but I'm hoping there'll be plenty of paths for different playstyles, whether you choose to use the power-ups or not, and that those power-ups will complement the flow that comes with good Sonic gameplay, as opposed to interrupting that like Sonic 4 Episode 2 did with the Tails functionality. This isn't the absolute safest bet in the world, but I kind of applaud it for that. At the same time, it is giving me exactly what I asked for. A new classic Sonic game that doesn't just treat our rounded, pudgy boy as a party trick, but instead sending him on his own brand new adventure with brand new stages to blaze his own trail. That's exactly what we needed. And to see Fang the Weasel coming back after all these years puts a massive smile on my face. Sure, we did see a mirage of him in the Mirage Saloon Zone from Sonic Mania, but that's not the same thing. It's good to see the real deal back and see him play a big role in the story. So maybe, just maybe, after all these years, Sega are giving classic Sonic the treatment he always deserved. It's insane to me how playing it so safe proved to be such a difficult task for this studio, but I am pleased to see that with Superstars we have not just a follow-up to Sonic Mania, but a culmination of everything they've learned from dev team to dev team over the course of classic Sonic's slow and painful revival. Not shying away from association with games and ideas that just didn't work as well as others. I do think it's taken us far too long to get to this stage, but honestly, I didn't believe we'd ever get here in the first place at this rate. The fact we are here now makes me very happy. Welcome back to the Sonic franchise, Naoto Ohshima. Fingers crossed, Sonic Superstars delivers on its terrific potential. I, for one, think it looks fantastic. So for now, that concludes the long and painful journey to Sonic Superstars, with a brief history of the modern classic Sonic. What do you guys think? What do you think of these games? What are you thinking of how Sonic Superstars is shaping up? What do you think of this video? Comment below, discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want to support these videos, get a little bit of bonus content, and get your name in the credits of these videos, you can do so for as little as $1 a month over on my Patreon. Link is in the description below. And now a super special shout out to the patrons in the $10 tier, which I will be attempting in a Sonic the Hedgehog voice. Their names are
Dare Denny, Cale Bennett, whoa, that Jordo, alright, Kenji Cobain, oh yeah, Legendary Ray Ray, Dr. SP with your PSA, Father's Day is here, I'll have to give him a call with the phone he paid for, thanks Dad, Sergio, Cirrus a Skeptic, did you know the skin on your elbow is called a weenus? Heh, I sure didn't know. Alright, I hated every minute of that. So with the shred of dignity I have left, here are the patrons in the $5 tier. We've got Yakko the Volcanic Muto, Broski, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Council of Geeks. Thank you all so much for your generous contributions, and as for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.